What's up guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to my little SubaruONLY shop here in Northern California. In today's video, we're going to be installing this Killer Bee aftermarket welded pickup. And in addition to that aftermarket welded pickup, I'm also going to install one of these later model STI oil pans. This oil pan has an improved baffle design and it's a great upgrade to do in addition to that welded pickup. I've got all the parts needed behind me and I'm going to walk you guys through all the steps to install both these parts. Thanks so much for checking out the video, guys. My name's Luke. This is the SubaruONLY show. This is my little SubaruONLY shop. It's a DIY Subaru channel. It's a channel where all I do is Subaru builds and race Subaru vehicles in motorsport events. It's a DIY themed channel where I walk you guys through the steps to get your Subarus back on the road and hopefully do a little racing of your own. So thanks for checking out the video, guys. I really appreciate it. Okay, so what's the game plan? We're going to install one of these aftermarket welded oil pickups, and to get at that oil pickup, you're definitely going to have to remove that oil pan. So that's the first thing. You're going to have to remove your stock oil pan. Now these Subaru oil pans actually use a liquid adhesive as a gasket. They don't actually have some kind of rubber or cork gasket they use. So you're going to have to get the correct Subaru or equivalent RTV to use. And that's what I have right here. This is actually the Subaru factory OEM RTV. And that's the stuff, the Subaru OEM RTV, right there. Now another option to use, if you guys are going to do a lot of RTVing in the future, is to actually get one of these larger tubes. This is actually a 3-bond brand RTV, and I believe this is what's used in the Subaru dealerships. This is what the stuff looks like, and as you can see, it's part number 1217B. It comes in a big tube like this, and because you hold it in this big apparatus, it makes it a lot easier to control, and makes it a lot easier to lay a nice even bead along the surface. Anytime I can use one of these larger tools for my RTV, I definitely like to go ahead and use this option. Okay, so the first step is to remove that oil pan, that way you have access to remove that oil pickup. And as you can see, I've got this engine on my engine stand, I have it flipped over so I have easy access to get to that oil pan. And as you'll also notice, this oil pan is actually that early style wide oil pan that doesn't have as good oil control when you have lateral G-forces. So this is the oil pan that you actually want to get rid of and upgrade to that later style 2007 and later STI oil pan. Those oil pans always have that narrower kicked out section and they don't have this wide flat area like this one has. That's a really easy way to distinguish these earlier style oil pans. And while I'm at it, I'm going to go ahead and try out my brand new White Line gloves. Thanks again, White Line, for sending these over. Super stoked. Got the grippy surface on the hands, legit. All right, let's remove these little 10mm bolts. Okay, after you've removed all those 10mm bolts, you're going to find this oil pan is still totally seized to that engine. You're probably not going to be able to budge it with just your bare hands. So you're going to have to go ahead and grab yourself a rubber mallet, something like this sucker, with rubber on both sides. This is a great little option to use. You're going to have to tap this oil pan around the perimeter to break it loose from that RTV seal that it still has. Basically just think about where you're tapping it and think about where the strong parts are on this oil pan, around the corners and where it has extra strength from all the bends and the creases. There you go. And I think we're loose. Okay, at this point, when you take this oil pan off, be prepared for a little bit of oil to drain out. There's definitely going to be some residual oil in that oil pan, and if you're not ready for it, it's going to make a big mess. Okay, let's remove this sucker so you guys can see exactly where that factory oil pickup is. Okay, and there you have it. This is the factory oil pickup. As you can see, it's got that round shape and that little mesh screen, and it's got this single tube right here that goes to your oil pump, and then a single arm right here that's bracing it. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this factory oil pickup. I'm going to replace it with that aftermarket welded Killer Bee one. Okay, to remove this factory OEM pickup, we're actually going to have to remove 3 little bolts. There's a 10mm bolt right here, there's a 10mm bolt right here, and that's on either side of that oil pickup tube. On that support bracket, there's actually a 10mm bolt right here. So we'll go ahead and remove all 3 of these 10mm bolts. Just slowly kind of wiggle it out. Might have a little bit of interference fit, but it came right out. Anytime you replace one of these oil pickups, you also want to replace that little O-ring. And these Killer B pickups come with a brand new O-ring. Alright guys, and once you have all those 10mm bolts removed, that oil pan baffle will come right out. And that's what this sucker looks like on the inside. Alright, let's get rid of this sucker and let's replace it with that newer style baffle. And if you set them side by side, you can actually see that there's quite a few differences when you compare that older style, like this one, to the newer style, like this one. As you can see, that newer style actually has 3 separate cutouts in it that actually provide a lot more draining back to the oil pan. It doesn't have the big cutout right here in the middle, or the other little cutout. So these crankcase baffles are actually a completely different design with the way they let oil drain back to that oil pan. And that's the reason when you change to that newer style oil pan, you also need to change to this newer style crankcase baffle. But before I install this new crankcase baffle, I'm actually going to point one more thing out. There's actually going to be 2 of these little rubber pads that are going to be on the side of this baffle, and you want to make sure you retain those and you don't get rid of them. These are here for a reason, and I'm pretty sure that part of the reason these are here is because they actually absorb some of the harmonics from the engine, and if you don't have these suckers here, you might actually run the risk of those harmonics from the engine being transferred into this baffle and then loosening those bolts so that they actually come loose in your oil pan while you're driving your car. So you definitely want to leave these little rubber insulation pads in this baffle when you install it. And then go ahead and set it in, and it should bolt right in the same locations that the old style baffle was in. Now you want to remember, 2 of these bolts are actually going to be used for the support brackets for that oil pickup. Okay, here's that aftermarket welded pickup from Killer B. And as you can see, this pickup actually has 2 separate support legs that come off of it. And that's actually different than the original one. When you compare these oil pickups side by side, you can see that the original OEM one from Subaru actually only has 1 support leg. This Killer B one has 2 support legs. And when you compare the thickness of the materials used, you'll also see that this Killer B pickup actually uses a much thicker material for all these braces. And they actually have a little triangulation welded in here to add additional support. On top of that, this tube is much thicker, and of course all the little joints are fully welded. And the last thing is actually the pickup shape and the design of the pickup. This Killer B one actually has this little triangular shaped roof with a little cutout in the middle to draw in the oil, as opposed to this OEM one that has the round flat design with that strainer right there in the middle. This Killer B pickup is designed that way because if your oil pan was to get crushed up into your pickup, this factory OEM one can actually get completely sealed by that crushed oil pan, and then that would lead to oil starvation, which would lead to a spun bearing and the need for a completely rebuilt motor. This Killer B pickup with this triangular shaped design will actually prevent the oil pickup from being completely cut off if that oil pan were to get crushed down, and that way you actually will always maintain oil flow and you won't actually have starvation, and you might actually prevent a seized engine in that situation. And then the last thing to check before you put this new oil pickup in is that you have a nice good O-ring on. This oil pickup has got that O-ring right there, so it's ready to be installed. So go ahead, set that oil pickup down. We'll set it in place and we'll screw it down. Okay, and then go ahead and lightly snug it down. Double check that everything else is lightly snugged down before you apply the final torque to all these bolts. Okay guys, I've got this Killer B welded pickup hand tightened, and we've also got this new baffle plate hand tightened down. So the next step is to torque all these bolts down to the factory specs. And to do that, I'm going to go ahead and reference the factory service manual. Let's go check that out right now. Okay guys, here's an exploded view from my factory service manual for this 2005 WRX EJ-205 motor. And as you guys can see, if I zoom in, here's where the oil pickup is, and here's that baffle plate that we're bolting onto the underside of the engine. So to look up the torque specs for this oil pickup, we're going to look up the torque specs for this T3 reference number, and then for the bolts that hold on the baffle plate, I'm going to look up the reference number for that T2 spec. And to look up the T2 and the T3 spec, you basically just zoom down here to the little reference table, and you'll see for T2, you'll tighten these bolts down to 6.4 Newton meters or 4.7 foot-pounds. And then for T3, it's 10 Newton meters or 7.2 foot-pounds. So that's what I'll do. I'm working in foot-pounds, so I'm going to tighten those bolts down to 4.7 and 7.2. 4.7 foot-pounds is not very much, guys, so make sure you got a torque wrench that goes that low. Alright, and then 7.2 foot-pounds for these bolts. Make sure it's lined up squarely. Give it a nice, even torque. Alright, that's it, 7.2. Okay, this baffle plate and this oil pickup are completely done. It's now time to apply that RTV to our new style oil pan and get that sucker installed. Alright guys, the next step is to lay a nice bead of RTV around the perimeter of this oil pan. And to do that, I'm actually going to use this sucker. This caulking gun allows you to use two hands and have a lot better control than trying to use that little tube dispenser. And this Fiji Bond, part number 1217V, is actually the factory Subaru OEM RTV. So I'll bring the camera in close so you guys can see exactly how I lay down this bead. Alright, now you basically just want to do a nice even bead. Stay in that little groove. And make your way on the inside right there. Just work your way around. Nice and even. And on the inside of those bolt holes. Don't go too fast and don't go too slow. Trick is to get the right speed. See, I'm kind of messing up a little bit. I go back a little bit. Go on the inside. As I'm doing this, I'm slowly squeezing the handle of this caulking gun. You don't want big chunks of this RTV coming off inside your oil pan and then getting stuck in your strainer or getting pulled up into your oil pump. That's the last thing you want. That's one of the main reasons a sloppy engine build can lead to a destroyed engine, because getting any debris up in your oil system and then having that debris, RTV or any kind of like little shavings pumped in through your oiling system into your journals will actually clog the little ports and will actually end up starving a specific location of your engine for oil. And if you starve anywhere for your oil that needs it for a journal bearing, you're going to basically seize that bearing to the crankshaft or the rod or the piston, wherever it is, and you're going to throw something outside the block. That's when people talk about having a spun bearing. A spun bearing is basically oil starvation and causing that bearing to go completely dry, heat up, weld itself to the crankshaft or the rod, and then it basically becomes one piece and no longer is rotating, and you got something that starts to puncture off the side of the block. So right there is a little bit too thick for sure. I kind of see where I got it a little bit too thick. Just kind of go around the edge right there and get that out. Just gonna kind of go and just keep it like a millimeter above so I can kind of even out the thickness. This is the last step real fast. Just kind of keep it a millimeter above to try to spread out the thickness of that bead you have. And make sure you got enough everywhere. See, it's definitely too thick on this corner. Probably have it too thick over here too now. I do. Let's just kind of even that out a little bit. Just a nice even bead. You don't want a thin coat. You need to have a little thickness here, but just a nice even little bead is what you want. Okay, this looks good. I'm gonna go ahead and flip it over, lay it down on top of that block, and then bolt these bolts down to the factory specs, which I believe is actually only about 3.6 or 3.7 foot-pounds. All right, let's get this sucker on. And then last thing, before you throw this thing on, make sure you got that flat rubber gasket on that drain port. And then go ahead and carefully set that sucker down. And you get those bolts in, and you should be good to go. Go ahead and snug those bolts down first, and then I'll torque them down to that 3.6 or 3.7 foot-pound spec. And as you guys will notice, I'm actually using new bolts. It's a nice little finishing touch to do. It's not necessary, you're not going to see this. It'll probably get a little bit oily over time, but I actually have a box full of these 10mm, 12mm, 14mm zinc-coated bolts. Bam, my box full of bolts.
So basically, these are all my zinc plated and nickel plated or non-plated bolts. They're all different metric sizes and lengths. I will mention on these oil pan bolts, you do need to have a little locking washer. This sucker is pretty much ready to go. The only thing I'll mention is that the factory drain plug is not a magnetic drain plug. So I always like to remove this sucker and replace it with a drain plug that has a little magnetic tip in it. That way, if there's any shavings in your oil, it'll actually catch those little shavings and you'll see it every time you drain your oil.
Okay guys, with the installation of that redesigned later model oil pan and that Killer Bee welded pickup, we've actually completed another step on this whiteboard behind me. So let's head over to this whiteboard and let's knock off another step from this list. Okay, we finished step 8, the oil pickup and the oil pan. Bam. And next up on the list is installing those new head gaskets. But in addition to those new head gaskets, I'm actually going to install ARP studs on this engine. That's a great little upgrade to do, and adding those ARP studs when you replace your head gaskets with new multi-layer steel head gaskets is a really great combination to do. But I'm going to wrap this video up here for today, guys. Thank you so much for checking out the video. If you have any questions or comments, please go ahead and leave them in the comments section. If you like this video, please go ahead and give it a like. And if you think this video would be good for any of your friends in the Subaru community, please go ahead and share the link to this video. Okay guys, that's it for today. Thank you so much for checking out the video. My name's Luke. This is the SubaruONLY channel. Until next time guys, later!